"Please don't come any closer," Lisa shouted, her voice choked with fear. But Joseph, sensing the desperation and anguish in those words, stopped in his tracks. The rain poured down that night, cold and relentless. Joseph hurried along, his head down to block the sharp wind, when he heard a sound that sent a chill through him. It was a cry, faint and desperate, nearly drowned out by the storm. He followed the sound to a lone tree where he saw a young girl crouched, trying to shield two small bundles of cloth from the rain. "Please, don't come any closer," she shouted, her voice filled with fear. Joseph stopped in his tracks, recognizing the desperation in her tone. "I am not here to hurt you. I just want to help," he said gently, hoping to ease her fear. The girl, Lisa, looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. They're my brothers. They have no one," she whispered, clutching the small bundles tighter as if letting go might cause them to disappear. Joseph's heart sank when he saw the pale faces of the twins, Daniel and Susan. They looked so fragile. "You don't have to go through this alone. Let me help," Joseph offered. Lisa hesitated, fear and hope flickering in her eyes. Finally, with a shaky breath, she nodded. "Please, help us," she murmured, allowing Joseph to come closer. Without wasting time, Joseph carefully picked up one of the twins, feeling the small, cold body in his arms. "Let's go. My house isn't far. You all need to warm up," he said, covering the baby with his coat. Lisa tried to stand, but her legs wobbled with exhaustion. "Here, lean on me," Joseph suggested, gently placing her arm around his shoulders. As they walked, the ground seemed unsteady beneath their feet, but Joseph kept moving, determined to get them to safety. The walk to Joseph's house wasn't long, but to Lisa, every second felt endless. When they finally arrived, Joseph pushed the door open with his shoulder, revealing a small but warm and cozy room. "Quick, get inside," he urged, helping her across the threshold. The warmth from the fireplace immediately wrapped around them, a welcome contrast to the freezing night. Lisa almost collapsed from relief, the warmth and safety overwhelming her. "Put them by the fire," Joseph instructed, as he hurried to arrange blankets on the floor for the twins. "Everything's going to be okay. They'll be okay," he said, more to himself than to her, as if repeating the words could make them true. Lisa sat down beside her brothers, her exhaustion and gratitude written all over her face. I don't know how to thank you," she began, her voice trembling. "You don't need to thank me," Joseph interrupted gently, raising his hand to stop her. "Just rest. That's all that matters right now. The main thing is you're safe now," he said, smiling softly, giving Lisa a sense of calm she hadn't felt in ages. He handed her a cup of hot tea. "Here, drink this. It'll help settle your nerves." Lisa accepted the cup with shaky hands, feeling the warmth spread through her as the steam gently touched her face. The twins, now warm and with full bellies, had finally drifted off to sleep, their small bodies relaxed for the first time in hours. Joseph watched them, his expression tender, as though they were already his own. "You're a good man, Joseph," Lisa said, her voice tight with emotion. "I was so scared. I thought no one would care." Joseph knelt down next to her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Believe me, there's still love and kindness in this world, even in the most surprising places," he promised, his voice full of sincerity and determination. Lisa, finally allowing herself to let go, sighed deeply, a wave of hope washing over her. "Thank you for everything," she whispered, leaning back and closing her eyes. But for Joseph, the night was far from over. While Lisa and the twins slept, he stayed awake, sitting by the fireplace, watching the flames dance, deep in thought about what the future might hold. Slowly, the dawn began to break, soft light filtering through the window of Joseph's small home, while the warmth from the fire still lingered in the room. Lisa, sitting in a nearby chair, watched the twins sleep peacefully. Sensing her restlessness, Joseph quietly walked over and sat beside her. "Lisa, you're safe now, but I need to understand what happened. Why were you alone on the streets with your brothers? Where's your mum?" His voice was gentle but filled with concern. Lisa bit her lip, holding back the urge to cry. Though still just a child, she had already been through things no one should ever have to face. "My mum. Her name is Anne," she began, her voice soft but determined to tell the truth. "She worked for this man, a bad man named Zach. He was rich and powerful, and everybody was scared of him. He and my mum, they were together." Joseph nodded, encouraging her to keep going. "And then?" he asked, his stomach tightening, bracing himself for the worst. Lisa took a deep breath, trying to gather the strength to revisit the painful memories. "My mum got pregnant with Daniel and Susan. When she told Zach, he got really mad. He said she couldn't keep the babies, that he didn't want anything to do with us, that he was too important to be bothered." Her voice wavered as she spoke, almost in a whisper. Despite her young age, the weight of what she was saying was far beyond her years. Anne, who was a loving mother, refused to let her children be ignored or abandoned. She wanted Zach to take responsibility, to acknowledge the twins as his own, even if it meant facing his anger. "Mum was brave," Lisa continued, staring at the floor now. "She told him he had to be their father, that he had to help take care of us." Her voice grew quieter. "But Zach, he just got even angrier. He said that if she didn't leave and keep quiet, terrible things would happen to all of us, that he had the power to do whatever he wanted." Her voice grew darker as she recounted the threats. Joseph gave her hand a gentle squeeze, trying to offer her some comfort. "That must have been really tough on your mom," he said, his voice filled with empathy. Lisa nodded, her eyes starting to tear up. Mum was so scared. She knew he could hurt us. So one night, she woke me up and told me to grab the babies. She said we had to leave and get far away. Her voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. She said she'd catch up with us later, but she never did. I waited, Joseph. I waited, but she never came back. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper as she sobbed. Joseph's heart ached hearing those words. He could only imagine the desperation Anne must have felt, sending her kids away to protect them from someone as dangerous as Zach. "So you took your brothers and ran to save them," Joseph said, admiration swelling in his chest. "You were so brave, Lisa." Lisa wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to pull herself together. "I just want Mum to come back. I just want her to be okay," she murmured, her voice heavy with sadness that Joseph knew no child should ever feel. "We will find her, Lisa. I promise," Joseph said, determination hardening in his voice. "We'll look for your mum, and Zach will pay for everything he's done." Lisa, completely exhausted, finally fell asleep. Joseph sat by the twins. He knew he was about to face a dangerous fight, but the lives of those kids and Anne depended on him being strong and brave. With Lisa's words still echoing in his head, Joseph knew he had to act quickly. He wasn't naive. He understood that someone as powerful and ruthless as Zach couldn't be taken down alone. There was only one person he could trust, an old friend with enough experience to help. Jason, a former cop who, despite leaving the force, was known for his integrity and his relentless pursuit of justice. "I need your help, Jason," Joseph thought as he got ready to leave. He knew he was putting everything on the line, but there wasn't any other option. When he arrived at Jason's modest house, Jason greeted him with surprise. "Joseph, what's going on? Why are you here so late?" Jason asked, noticing the tension on Joseph's face. Joseph hesitated for a second, but knew there was no time to waste. "Jason, I'm in a mess, and I need your help. I found these kids, and they're in danger because of Zach." Jason's expression hardened at the mention of Zach, a man he had crossed paths with years ago. "Come in, let's talk," Jason said, his voice calm but filled with concern. Sitting at the kitchen table, Joseph explained everything. He told Jason about Lisa's trembling hands, Zach's threats, Anne's disappearance, and the danger looming over the twins. Jason sat quietly, his expression growing more serious with every word. "I always knew Zach was trouble, but I never imagined he could do something this awful," Jason muttered, staring off into space as he quickly processed the information. "You did the right thing by coming to me, Joseph. But we have to tread carefully. Zach's got eyes and ears everywhere," he warned, the seriousness of the situation sinking in. "I know it's dangerous, but I can't just sit back and do nothing," Joseph replied, his voice thick with emotion and determination. "These kids need protection. And Anne, she might be in serious danger too," he added, looking pleadingly at Jason. Jason took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation bearing down on him. "You're right, Joseph. I'll do whatever I can to help, but we have to be smart about this." "Zach's not the kind of guy who's going down without a fight," Jason said, already starting to map out a plan in his head. They spent the next few hours going over every detail, trying to figure out their next move. "First things first, we need evidence. Without that, we've got nothing to pin on Zach," Jason said, standing up and pacing the room. Joseph nodded. "I still have some connections in the police force, a couple of people we can trust, but we have to keep this under the radar. One wrong move, and Zach will know everything." "Agreed," Jason responded. "Our first priority is finding Anne. If we can get to her, she could testify against Zach and help keep those kids safe." Joseph's voice was hopeful as he added, "If we find her, she could be the key." Jason placed a firm hand on Joseph's shoulder. "Look, I know you're doing this for the kids, but I want you to be ready. Zach's dangerous. He won't think twice about doing whatever it takes to protect himself. You need to be prepared for anything." Jason spoke with a stern tone. "We can't mess this up." Joseph nodded, taking in the seriousness of his friend's words. "I get it, Jason. But these kids deserve to grow up without fear, and I'm not about to let Zach ruin their lives," Joseph replied, his voice full of resolve. With a solid plan in place and renewed hope, Joseph headed home to where Lisa and the twins were waiting for him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Jason by his side, he finally felt like they had a real shot at stopping Zach. Joseph and Jason threw themselves into the work, putting in long hours to gather the evidence they needed to take Zach down and keep Lisa, Daniel, and Susan safe. The first few weeks were tense, with every move they made carefully calculated. Jason's background as a former cop gave them an edge. He knew exactly where to search and how to avoid drawing too much attention. Jason began reaching out to a few old police buddies he could still trust, asking for help without giving too much away. "I can't tell you everything," Jason told them, "but I need to know where Anne is, and if there's anything tying Zach to his dirty business." Meanwhile, Joseph did his best to keep things normal at home, taking care of the kids while the constant worry for their safety ate away at him. They can't find out what we're doing, Jason warned. Zach's sharp, but we've got to be smarter. Their first break came from one of Jason's contacts. Though hesitant at first, the guy eventually handed over some key information on Zach's sketchy deals. There are suspicious transfers of big money, but they're hidden among legitimate transactions. It won't be easy to prove, but it's not impossible, Jason said, as he laid out the documents for Joseph to see. Joseph didn't get all the technical stuff, but he knew they were onto something big. This might just be the beginning, Jason. We've got to dig deeper, he said, his determination growing stronger with each passing day. As they kept looking for evidence, the tension hit its peak when Jason managed to break into a property Zach used for his shadiest dealings. We've got a lead on where Zach might be hiding something crucial, but it's risky. We need to get in and out without leaving a trace, Jason warned, fully aware of the danger. Without missing a beat, Joseph agreed to join him. The infiltration into Zach's place tested their nerves and skills. Every move was silent, and the air felt thick with tension. Once inside, Jason and Joseph stumbled upon a hidden room filled with documents that could ruin Zach. "Here it is," Jason whispered as he opened a secret safe. "These papers link Zach to all sorts of illegal activities, blackmail, bribes, the whole thing." "This is exactly what we needed," he added, feeling a mix of relief and caution. Joseph took the papers, understanding the gravity of the situation. "This will bring him down," he murmured, hope and fear battling within him. They had succeeded in gathering the evidence, but it made Zach even more suspicious. His goons began watching everyone he considered an enemy more closely, and both Jason and Joseph could feel the heat. "We need to be extra careful, Joseph. Zach's making moves, which means we're closing in on him, but it also means he's more dangerous now," Jason warned, keeping an eye on Zach's next steps. Joseph understood how risky things were getting, but they were too deep to stop now. "We're so close to exposing him, we can't back out," he said, trying to mask the fear creeping into his voice. With the evidence secured, Jason and Joseph started prepping for the next phase. Time was running out, and every minute mattered. With everything in place and a well-crafted plan to reveal Zach's crimes, it seemed like they were just one move away from delivering justice. Joseph felt hope, but anxiety was right there with it. His main concern was making sure Lisa, Daniel, and Susan were safe, and finding Anne, though the odds of her being alive were shrinking by the day. Still, he trusted Jason. Through it all, the ex-cop had shown himself to be not only loyal, but also a crucial partner. On the night they decided to make their move, Jason proposed a meeting spot far away from any prying eyes or Zach's spies. "We have to be super cautious, Joseph. Let's meet somewhere safe. Bring the evidence, and together we'll take it straight to the press and the authorities," Jason said, his voice full of seriousness. At that point, Joseph didn't question him. He knew what had to be done. Joseph made sure everything was ready as they'd agreed, ensuring Lisa and the twins were safe before stepping out. "Don't be too long, Joseph. I'm scared," Lisa said, holding his hand just before he left. Joseph crouched down, looking into her eyes. "I promise I'll be back soon. When I do, all this will be over," he reassured her, though he was trying to mask his own fear. She nodded, trying to be strong, but the fear in her eyes was obvious. The meeting spot was an old, run-down factory, its windows shattered and the walls covered in moss, giving off a creepy, abandoned vibe. The shadows cast by the rusty old machines formed eerie shapes under the dim light from the few working lamps. Joseph entered, the cold, damp air wrapping around him as his footsteps echoed on the cracked concrete floor. Jason was already there, his face fixed in a look of intense focus. "Did you bring everything?" Jason asked without any small talk. Yeah, it's all here, Joseph said, handing over a thick folder stuffed with incriminating papers and evidence. Jason opened it and flipped through the pages for a moment. This is finally going to end, Joseph said, trying to calm the growing mixture of relief and anxiety inside him. Yeah, it's going to end, Jason replied, but something in his voice made Joseph feel uneasy. There was a chill to Jason's words, a coldness that didn't match their usual camaraderie. A sense of dread crept up Joseph's spine, like a gut instinct telling him something was very wrong. Jason, what's going on? He asked, his tone shifting from hope to worry. Before Joseph could react, he felt a hard hit to the back of his head, knocking him to his knees. The world spun as his vision blurred and sharp pain surged through his skull. He tried to stand, but quickly. From the shadows, several large men with menacing faces appeared surrounding him. "Jason, what's happening?" Joseph shouted, trying to make sense of it all. Jason stepped forward, but now his face was cold, with no trace of guilt. "I'm sorry, Joseph, but this is just business," he said, his voice flat, like a knife twisting in Joseph's gut. Joseph struggled to process his words, but the mix of pain and betrayal left him speechless. "You've been working with him all along?" he asked, his voice shaking, holding on to the last thread of hope that this was some horrible mistake. "I did what I had to do. Keep you from messing things up. Jack known about everything since the start. Every step you took, Joseph, you never stood a chance," Jason replied, his voice emotionless. Jason's words hit Joseph like a ton of bricks. Each sentence seemed to tear at his soul. "I trusted you, Jason. Why? Why betray me like this?" Joseph whispered, feeling his strength drain away. "Because power and money talk, Joseph," Jason said, his tone cold and uncaring. Zach's men yanked Joseph away, dragging him across the factory floor. "Take him to the usual spot. The boss wants a word with him before this is over," Jason ordered, his tone devoid of any emotion. Joseph, still reeling from the blow and the shock of betrayal, tried to resist, but was quickly overpowered. Fear gripped him tighter with every passing second, the pain of his failure hitting him hard. Lisa, the twins, Anne, their faces flashed through his mind. He couldn't believe he wouldn't keep his promise to them. As they pulled him outside, the sound of a heavy door slamming shut behind him felt like his world was collapsing. His mind was racing, his head pounding, but one word echoed over and over: betrayal. He had trusted Jason completely, and now he was at the mercy of the man who had destroyed his new family. This can't be how it ends, he thought, the small flicker of hope barely hanging on. The car sped off, taking Joseph to who knows where, but there was no doubt it wasn't good. His life was at stake, but worse than that, he had let down the people who needed him the most. Meanwhile, little Lisa couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in the small room where she was hiding with her brothers. Something deep inside told her that something was terribly wrong. Joseph's words echoed in her mind. "I promise I'll be back soon." But as more time passed, the silence grew unbearable. "What if he needs me?" she wondered, glancing at the twins who were sound asleep, unaware of the storm brewing in her heart. Determined, Lisa making sure her brothers were safe before sneaking out. It was raining again as Lisa entered the deserted streets. The wind was cold and bitter, but she kept moving, her instincts urging her to find Joseph. "I have to find him. He's always been there for me. Now it's my turn," she whispered, a small prayer to herself. Lisa called Joseph but couldn't reach him. She didn't dare imagine what would happen if Joseph were captured by Jack. Lisa suddenly remembered that her mother had once revealed a secret place where Jack often went. After a few hours, Lisa reached that abandoned factory, according to her fragmented memory. She crept along the cracked, damp walls, finding her way in without being seen. Her heart pounded as she came to a broken window and peered inside. What she saw made her stomach drop. Joseph was surrounded by men she didn't recognize, and Jason, the person Joseph had trusted the most, stood there with a cold, detached expression. He betrayed Joseph, Lisa realized in horror. She knew she had to do something, but what could a 7-year-old girl do against a group of dangerous men? Then she spotted Joseph's phone lying on the floor, just a few feet from where Jason stood. Her heart raced. That phone could be the key to saving Joseph. Swallowing her fear, Lisa moved cautiously, her small feet making no sound as she slipped through the darkness, inching toward the phone. Without drawing any attention, she grabbed it and disappeared into the shadows, her mission just beginning. With shaky hands, she turned on the voice recorder app on her phone, capturing the conversation unfolding in front of her. "I did what you wanted, Zach. He's here, ready for you to deal with," Jason said, his voice cold enough to send chills down Lisa's spine. She bit her lip, fighting the tears welling up in her eyes. "We had a deal, Jason. You bring Joseph and I'll handle the rest. No more problems. Got it?" said a voice Lisa didn't recognize but knew was Zach. She kept recording. The conversation revealed more horrifying details. Zach's threats against Anne and the twins, and how Jason had been betraying Joseph from the very start. It was all there, every awful word, and Lisa realized this recording was her only hope to save the people she loved. When the conversation finally ended, Lisa, gripping her phone like a lifeline, her heart pounding so loud she thought for sure they'd hear it. "I have to get out of here. I need to find someone who can help," she thought, trying to calm the panic rising inside her. As the men led Joseph outside, Lisa used the moment of distraction to sneak out the same window she had entered. She sprinted away, her mind racing as fast as her feet. "I have to save Joseph. I have to save Mom," she repeated to herself over and over, like a chant that pushed her to keep running, even though her legs were screaming for a break. She ran straight to the police station, the only place she could think of for help. She stumbled in, drenched and out of breath, drawing curious stares from the few officers still on duty. "Please, help. They've taken my friend. They're going to hurt Joseph," she cried out, holding up her phone, her voice thick with fear. One of the officers, an older man with kind eyes, knelt down beside her. "Calm down, sweetheart. What happened? Who are they?" he asked, trying to comfort her. Lisa, between gasping breaths, explained what she had witnessed, her voice shaking but strong. "They're going to hurt him. I recorded everything," she said, handing the phone to the officer. He instantly grasped the seriousness of the situation. "We've got this. You did the right thing," he said in a calm but serious tone. As the officers started to mobilize, listening to the recording and preparing to act, Lisa, while relieved, couldn't shake the dread of what might happen next. "Please save Joseph and my mum," she begged, her voice filled with the kind of desperation only love can fuel. The tension in the station was thick. Every second felt like an eternity, especially for Lisa, who sat in the corner, her eyes wide with worry. "We need to move now. Zach won't think twice about killing Joseph or anyone who gets in his way," said the sergeant, his voice heavy with the weight of the situation. "We're dealing with dangerous people here. If anything goes wrong, lives could be lost," he added, as they quickly mapped out a rescue plan. Though Lisa was terrified, her thoughts remained focused on Joseph and her mom. "Please don't let anything bad happen to him," she whispered to the sergeant, who looked back at her with a firm but gentle expression. "I promise we'll do everything we can to get them back safely," he said, before heading off to lead the operation. Lisa's heart was filled with anxiety and fear, but she knew she had to hold on to hope. It was all she had left. The rescue team left the station in tense silence, the weight of the mission heavy in the air. As they neared the old mansion where Zack ran his operation and kept Joseph captive, the tension in the car grew thicker. "Our top priority is to get Joseph out, along with anyone else we find. Arresting Zack is important, but saving lives comes first," the sergeant reminded them, locking eyes with his team. They all nodded in understanding, knowing the stakes were high. But there was no backing down now. Time was running out, and every second lost could cost them everything. When they stopped a short distance from the mansion, the officers quietly stepped out, moving stealthily through the thick brush surrounding the property. Lisa had given them a detailed description of the layout, and now every bit of that information was crucial. "Split up. 2 of you hit the front to create a distraction while the rest of us sneak in from the back. Let's move fast," the sergeant ordered as each team member took their position. The tension was thick, but their training and focus kept them steady. The operation kicked off smoothly. 2 officers burst through the front door, causing just enough chaos to draw Zack's men away, while the others slipped inside from the back, moving quickly and quietly through the shadowy hallways. Gunshots and shouting echoed through the mansion, turning it into a controlled frenzy. "Find Joseph! He's probably locked up somewhere out of the way," the sergeant called out, as the team methodically searched every corner, weapons ready, eyes scanning for any threat. Down in a dark, cold basement, Joseph sat, hearing the commotion above. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope sparked in his chest. They came, Joseph thought, straining against the ropes cutting into his wrists. Hours of waiting, mixed with Zack's constant threats, had drained his strength. But the fire to survive and protect the kids still flickered in his chest. He knew giving up wasn't an option. Not now. The door suddenly burst open, and the blinding light of flashlights flooded the room. For a second, Joseph couldn't see, but he quickly recognized the uniforms. "Joseph, are you alive?" one of the officers called out, running toward him. I'm okay," Joseph rasped, his voice barely a whisper, but a wave of relief washed over him as they hurriedly cut the ropes binding his hands. With their help, he staggered to his feet. "Let's get you out of here," the sergeant said, gripping Joseph's arm to steady him. Zack, realizing he was trapped, made his last desperate move. "No one's leaving here alive," Zack shouted, stepping out of a dark hallway with a gun in his hand, his eyes wild with hatred and desperation. The sergeant immediately moved in front of Joseph, his gun raised. "Drop the gun, Zack. You're surrounded. It's over," he ordered, his voice cold and steady. Zack, fueled by panic, just grinned, a twisted, chilling grin. "It's over for you. Not for me," he said, pulling the trigger. The shot rang out, the sound crashing through the room like a thunderclap. For a split second, time froze for Joseph. But in the next instant, he saw the sergeant deflect the shot just in time, the bullet burying itself harmlessly into the wall. In a blur of movement, the officers took Zack down, disarming and cuffing him before he could fire again. "You're going to pay for this, Zack," the sergeant growled, glaring down at him with disgust. Joseph, still trembling, felt a rush of gratitude and relief flood his body. "Thank you. I didn't think I'd make it out," he mumbled, gripping the sergeant's shoulder for support. "You're tough, Joseph, and someone believed in you. Someone helped us find you in time," the sergeant replied with a small smile. Joseph knew right away who he was talking about. The nightmare over, Joseph was taken to the police station. There, still shaken but alive, he found Lisa waiting for him, her heart full of hope and fear. As soon as he stepped through the door, Lisa ran straight into his arms, holding him as tight as she could. "I thought you weren't coming back," she whispered, her voice shaky as she buried her face in his chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. Joseph hugged her back just as tight, feeling his own tears welling up. "I promised, didn't I? And Lisa, you saved my life." "You were incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The soft morning sunlight filtered through the windows of the police station, casting a warm glow over the room. It was a stark contrast to the days of fear and darkness that had haunted Lisa, Joseph, and the twins. The tense atmosphere had finally shifted, replaced with a palpable sense of relief. Zach was locked up, his control over them shattered, and the justice that once seemed out of reach was now becoming real. Joseph, still battered from the fight but with a much lighter heart, watched the children playing in the corner of the waiting room. A soft smile touched his lips as he realized that, despite everything, there was still room for joy and innocence. Word of Zach's arrest spread quickly through town, and with it came a mix of shock and relief among the locals. For years, Zach had ruled through intimidation, manipulation, and threats. But now his reign of terror was over. But even though Zach was gone, one question still lingered. What had happened to Anne? During the rescue, the police had found leads on her location, and now everyone waited on edge for news. Time dragged by slowly, each second filled with anxious hope. Finally, an officer entered the room, his expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. "We've got good news," he said, instantly drawing everyone's attention. "We found Anne. She was being held at a remote property, but she's alive. The doctors are with her now, and it looks like she'll be okay." His words hit like a wave of relief, and Lisa burst into tears, overwhelmed with happiness. "Mum, she's alive," she whispered, barely able to believe it. Joseph pulled her close, hugging her tightly as his own eyes filled with tears. "I told you we'd find her," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. The days that followed, Anne, though weak and deeply shaken by what she'd endured, was reunited with her children. Anne sobbed as she hugged Lisa, Daniel, and Susan, holding them as if she'd never let go. "I thought I'd lost you forever," Anne said, her voice trembling as she stroked the twins' faces. "Mum, we're together now, and we're going to be okay," Lisa replied, fighting back her own tears. Joseph stood off to the side, watching the reunion unfold. A huge weight seemed to lift from his shoulders, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he could finally breathe. He kept his word, protecting the kids and finding Anne, but even more, he found a strength in himself he never knew he had. "You all are an amazing family," he said as he finally approached them. Anne, still emotional, looked at Joseph with deep gratitude. "I don't even know how to thank you, Joseph. You saved my kids' lives, and mine too," she said, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad I could help," Joseph replied with a smile. He realized that despite everything they'd been through, this journey had changed them all in ways they never expected. After all, Joseph thought, no matter how long or dark the night, the sun always rises, bringing with it a fresh start. The future, once dark and uncertain, now held the promise of brighter days ahead. As the weeks went by, life found a new rhythm. Lisa, Daniel, Susan, and Anne made Joseph's house their home, and it became a safe space for all of them. The town, once overshadowed by Zach's cruelty, began to blossom into a place of renewal and hope. Inspired by Joseph and Lisa's bravery, the townspeople started rebuilding their lives, knowing that in the end, good had triumphed. As we close this story, it's natural to reflect. Could you show the courage Joseph did? Or Lisa's bravery? Or maybe Anne's unconditional love? This journey reminds us that even in the toughest moments, love and hope can light the way. The fight for justice, no matter how hard, is always worth it. Take a moment to think about it. How can you bring this strength into your everyday life? If this story touched you, go ahead and subscribe, give it a like, and hit that notification bell to keep up with more inspiring stories just like this one. As the weeks went by, life found a new rhythm. Lisa, Daniel, Susan, and Anne made Joseph's house their home, and it became a safe space for all of them. The town, once overshadowed by Zach's cruelty, began to blossom into a place of renewal and hope. Inspired by Joseph and Lisa's bravery, the townspeople started rebuilding their lives, knowing that in the end, good had triumphed. As we close this story, it's natural to reflect. Could you show the courage Joseph did? Or Lisa's bravery? Or maybe Anne's unconditional love? This journey reminds us that even in the toughest moments, love and hope can light the way. The fight for justice, no matter how hard, is always worth it. Take a moment to think about it.